What's your weirdest family moment? Story 1. I've told this story before and today I messed up, but I guess it warrants a revisit. So I met my eventual wife back in 2007, and the next summer, her grandparents moved to town. On July 4th, 2008, I did what I did every 4th back then, which was get a handle of Jameson, go to my friend's house, swim in his pool, get blackout drunk, and eat grilled hot dogs and hamburgers all day long. Well, at about 2 p.m., my girlfriend, eventual wife, shows up at the house and asks if I'm ready to go. Come to find out, she had already made plans to get off work early and go over to her grandparents' house to have food and for me to meet them for the first time. And I just forgot about it. At least that's what she tells me. I have already put away about a third of that handle, so I was pretty lit, but I gathered my wits and agreed to go. Well, when I got there, her grandfather greeted me with a shot of 149 proof whiskey and a Coors Light. I drank that and a lot more that day, so things went south pretty quick. At this point, I'm going off of what I've been told rather than what I remember. But sometime that afternoon, I decided that I needed to take a pee off the back porch. In broad daylight. In the suburbs. It was all I could do to stand up at that point. So of course I put my hand on something nearby so I could keep my balance. That thing just happened to be a grill that had been cooking for several hours. So my girlfriend's grandmother was closest to the door, and when she heard the commotion, she came outside to find me on the deck with my wang out, peeing everywhere, holding my hand, screaming, "Why's this grill so hot?" That crazy woman told this story at my wedding. In hindsight, they were super cool about it, but that was a crazy way to meet my eventual wife's grandparents. Story 2. When I was a lot younger, I'm 29 now, my parents had some people over, including my one aunt and uncle, who are incredibly straight-laced. Early on in the evening, in one of the family rooms, she put on a VHS tape to watch a movie she remembered seeing back during a trip she took with my uncle years ago. Nothing was really happening with the get-together as of yet, since it was still really early in the evening, so some of us stuck around to see what movie it was before more people came. Within the first 5 minutes, there were more topless girls and nudity in it than your average Skinny Max flick nowadays. My aunt is absolutely mortified at this point and says she doesn't remember any of this in the movie, while my mom, her sister, is laughing hysterically, grabs the remote for her and says she should keep it on just because what's going on is so ridiculous and my aunt's reaction is just so funny. I think my mom's exact words were, "How the heck could you not remember any of this? There's so many baloo-baloo-baloobies on the screen, I can't even see the plot." Everyone in the room is dying that she brought over what was essentially a softcore 80s sexploitation movie with the subplot of there being some skiing thrown in there sporadically. My dad walks in since he hears everyone laughing, and he's just got the biggest what the F face on when he sees what's up, makes an about face back towards the kitchen, and pours himself a drink. Story 3. One Thanksgiving many years ago, my mom got the bright idea that before eating, we would go around the table and everyone would share what they were thankful for. My dad told her repeatedly that he wasn't doing that, and that was a bad idea. But she insisted. So we are sitting there at the table waiting to see what happens. My whole family was in attendance. Brother, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, and my grandmother. My dad volunteers to go first, and the look on my mom's face is one where she's trying to decide if she should be worried about what he's going to say, mixed with wondering if he just decided to play along. My dad says, "I'm thankful that I'm 50 years old and I can still get a rock-hard direction." Half the table died laughing. Half the table was uncomfortable, my mom was ticked off, and my dad got exactly what he wanted and stopped that whole process in its tracks. Then it was dinner time. This is one of those stories that feels like it's only funny because it didn't happen to me. Because as hilarious as it is, the guy sounds like a huge jerk. The thing where people go around the table is kind of tacky, but it's also a pretty typical Thanksgiving tradition. The only reason it was a bad idea is because the dad himself turned it into one. You can't go out of your way to make it inappropriate and then act like you'd given a fair warning. Especially when you're 50, which is far more than old enough to know better. I don't mean to sound like a buzzkill because, again, it really is pretty funny. But I think the mom had good reason to be angry. It's nice that he can get hard, but it's even nicer when you have a wife who's happy enough with you to help you out with that. Story 4. I was at my first real girlfriend's house when I was in high school. We would do it in the basement when her family was home to avoid any walk-ins. After I finished, it was common practice to tie the condom in a knot and avoid throwing it in the trash bin to avoid the mom finding it when she was cleaning. So I left it on top of the ping pong table, thinking I could take it upstairs with me when we decided to leave. The ping pong table was right next to the couch. Well, I messed up. Her father and little brother thought it was a good time to go downstairs and play ping pong. The brother gets to the table first, sees the used rubber, picks it up, the load of swimmers just dangling there, holds it out, turns to his father and says, "Dad, what is this?" The dad's face was of sheer terror as he screamed at his son to drop it, grabbed his wrist and stomped upstairs, all while not breaking eye contact with me. I guess that instilled a fear of birth control into the poor girl. She got knocked up in college by a man her dad's age. Story 5. I moved back home from college after my freshman year and had to share a room with my high school-aged brother for a while. I had to listen to him rub one out every single night before he went to sleep. That was a little uncomfortable. Edit, for all the people saying I should have said something to him, he always wore headphones while jerking the gherkin. I didn't really want to go tap on his shoulder and say, "Hey, stop beating your pud." In retrospect, I should have worn headphones myself, but my mom kicked him out of the house for being a juvenile delinquent before the end of the summer, so it wasn't a long-term problem. Edit 2. Posted this in another comment, but we were on opposite sides of the room, with a tall dresser between us, so fortunately there was no direct line of sight. I could just hear it, and there's no mistaking that. Story 6. I was house-sitting for my grandparents many moons ago, and I had to get a fresh sheet. When I lifted the first one, lo and behold, there was my grandmother's vibrator. I kept that secret for years. When I eventually told my mom about it, her only reaction was, "Your grandfather is impotent." I was weirded out, but now I just laugh about it. Edit. There seems to be some confusion about the impotency, and obviously my grandfather wasn't always impotent. It happened with age. On a different and not entirely unrelated note, he is not my biological grandfather, so he could be my grandfather regardless. Freaking Reddit. If you didn't catch the implications of that edit, there were comments leaping to the wild conclusion that the grandmother must have been cheating on her husband and that the OP's mother is secretly an affair baby. I swear, most Reddit users are barely old enough to comprehend the shows you find on the Disney Channel, yet they read these stories hoping for something out of Days of Our Lives. If any of these Reddit detectives grow up to be actual detectives, it'll be a good day to be a criminal. You can just get away with whatever you want while they're looking to pin it on whichever person makes for the best plot twist. Story 7. When my siblings and I were all kids, my mom had this crazy idea for a family game. She bought hundreds of pencils and let us all into the bathroom, and we had a contest to see who could hold the most pencils with their body. Any part of the body was fair game. Fistfuls of pencils, under the armpits, in the mouth, behind the ears, poked through hair, in between toes, under boobs, sandwiched in the butt crack like a hot dog. Use your imagination. And no, there was nothing intimate about it. No insertion. And also, no, I have no idea what my mom was on that day. Edit. Okay, now this has gotten pretty visible. People are starting to make a lot of allegations and assumptions. So let me clear things up. My mom is kinda a ditzy wannabe hippie, and there really was nothing intimate about it. Some of us tried harder because of the competitive aspect of it, but we were mostly all bored within a few minutes and went back to our video games. No one was forced to do anything, and there was no touching. She probably had a thought along the lines of, "I wonder how many pencils I can hold with my whole body. Oh, I bet this could be a game." Story 8. I was helping my then-boyfriend's sister move into a new place, and the keys were at the new house, and someone needed to go get them. So my boyfriend and I drove over to get them. While we were there, we did a little exploring in the new empty house. We realized there was an attic and opened the ceiling door to let the steps down. I climbed up first, and, being in a skirt, gave my boyfriend a nice view. We ended up doing it right there on the attic ladder, and right in the middle, we hear the door open. Boyfriend's name called out, a pause, and then the door shut. We sheepishly returned to the rest of the family at the old house to find his sister trying not to laugh hysterically. She says their mother came over to try to find out what was taking so long. Upon her return, she just loudly exclaimed, "They were effing!" To this day, it's our favorite phrase to exclaim. Story 9. Oh man, I have many. One time when I was probably around 10 years old or so, my cousin was visiting us and decided to play a little game with me. Granted, I didn't quite understand the nuances of mixed families back then, but I knew something was up because she had significantly darker skin than me/us. She looked a little like Pocahontas to me. Well, I lived with my single grandmother at the time. My cousin was a couple of years older than me, and I'm told we were good friends and bathed together as kids. I don't remember this, was too young. On this particular day, we somehow ended up playing a game privately in my room wherein we would try to push each other over with a pillow, and the loser had to reveal a private part. She didn't even try. I won over and over, and she had the bigger pillow. She showed me everything she had, and I was flabbergasted. I remember it vividly. We never told anyone, and I haven't seen her in over a decade, incidentally. Yes, I have tried to find her again. No, I have not been successful. Our families have drifted apart. This OP put the word cousin in quotes, and it's massively confusing. Does this mean they weren't really cousins? Because that definitely makes the whole story a little bit easier to swallow. Granted, they were just kids exploring their bodies in a way kids don't really understand, so I wouldn't make too big a deal out of it anyway. But the fact that the cousin was slightly older and actually wanted to reveal herself certainly puts a spin on the whole thing that starts to sound questionable if they were actually related. And the difference in skin color doesn't mean they weren't. It's not the 1950s anymore. This kind of thing happens with relative frequency. Story 10. I was on a road trip with my parents and the family dog after my brother went to college, and we checked into a hotel room with 2 queen beds. My parents took one, the dog and I were in the other. My dad wanted to gross me out and said, "Now, son, if you hear anything in the middle of the night, keep your eyes on that wall," and pointed behind me with one hand, putting his arm around my disgusted mom with the other. I put my arm around the dog and said, "Okay, but I expect the same courtesy." Edit. Thanks for the golds. I'll admit this here. I was not going for a bestiality joke. I was going for a master debater joke, and put my arm around the dog to try and look cool. Edit 2. The dog's name was Chip, not Colby, and this happened around 2002. Since I'll occasionally explain references to the comments in these videos, you might expect me to pop in right here and explain why commenters assume the dog's name was Colby. And you would be mistaken, because the truth is, I can't figure that one out myself. We will all go to the graves without ever uncovering the answer to this question. Story 11. The morning after my wedding, I bumped into my cousin in the hotel lobby, and she was asking about one of my groomsmen. She wanted to know how we were related to him. I told her he was just a friend of mine. She looked disappointed by this, and at the time I had no idea why. She'd cheated on her new husband with him after the wedding reception, and she was bummed he wasn't her cousin or something. Story 12. I skipped school. I used to do it all the time because my dad worked 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. most days and was a single father. I was in my room, as per norm, and he came home early. Didn't want to get caught, so stayed perfectly still. My bedroom is at the top of the stairs. The computer is right at the base of the stairs. Dad watches corn for the next hour. I think he heard a squeak, 'cause he stopped to holler up the stairs for me, but I didn't budge, didn't move, didn't say anything, just waited. 5 minutes passed. He's satisfied, goes back to his business. Never told him, never skipped school again. Story 13. When I was 18, I dated a girl. She lived about an hour away, so I would stay at her house overnight, but her parents wouldn't let us stay in the same room, so I slept in a guest bed in the basement. Being 18 years old, we would be up very late and go to bed around 2 a.m. Her dad was some kind of delivery driver and worked around 4. He came down to the basement every single morning before work and pleasured himself to adult videos on the desktop computer while I was sleeping 10 feet away. There was only a couch between us, so the first couple minutes I lifted my head to see what he was doing before I realized. You better believe I didn't keep it a secret from her. I'd quietly text from under the blanket, "Your dad's jerking it again right next to me." That's honestly a little disturbing. I won't say creepy, since I seriously doubt that OP being down there was something the dad got off on. It sounds like he was more just super reckless and assumed that OP was asleep. But it's just weird to even take that chance. Wouldn't it ruin the experience just a little bit to know that your daughter's boyfriend is sleeping just 10 feet away from you? How do you keep it up as soon as that thought even crosses your mind? Seems like something most people would find at least a little bit difficult. Story 14. When I was still in school, I came home with my girlfriend at the time. We were upstairs in my room, and she's given me a bejesus. Across the room, I see the door start to slowly and ridiculously silently open. In walks my father. Sees me, sees her, most awkward eye contact ever. In a panic, I do the only thing I could think of. I point him out the door. Just as quietly as he came in, he was gone again. And on that day, he gained my eternal respect. She still doesn't know. Too long didn't read. Dad was a bro when it counted most. Story 15. My father accidentally texted a picture of my mother topless to my wife. She had just sent them a group text with pictures of the kids, and apparently he just sent it to the most recent conversation with my mom's name on it. My mother immediately called her, and my wife said when she picked up, my mom let out a big sigh and said, "Darn it, Larry," and then proceeded to apologize profusely. I heard about it all when I got home between the bouts of laugh so hard till you cry. Apparently, my mother has a nice rack. My dad has decided to act like nothing ever happened. Story 16. It was known for a long time that my grandpa had a child with his mistress. After he died, we found out he had yet another kid several years later. The mind screw part is that this second child is only 2 years older than me, meaning I have an aunt that I would have gone to high school with. Story 17. I was having trouble with my radiator and had no toolbox, so I asked my dad if I could borrow his. He came over and said he'd fix it for me. I hadn't had time to clean up since he only lives 2 minutes away, so he started reading me my rights about how messy my house is, etc., etc. As he was lamenting over my clothes being on the floor, he opened my wardrobe to demonstrate how much room I had. In my wardrobe, there's a box. My dad looked down at the box. The box was open. The box was filled with fetish gear and toys. My dad closed the wardrobe and fixed my radiator. This is why it's a pretty good rule of thumb never to go poking around someone else's room without their permission. You have no idea what you're going to find in there, but there's a solid chance you'd be happier not finding it. The bedroom is where people tend to keep the things they don't want their guests seeing, and they're usually right to feel safe in keeping whatever they want in there. But if you know your parents are like this, then I guess the lesson is also to never keep your box of dirty toys lying wide open. Story 18. When I was 12 or 13, at a hotel room with my parents for a basketball tournament, gold medal, thanks for asking, they did it in the bed right next to me, 10 minutes after lights out. I never mentioned it to anybody. Last weekend I was visiting New York City, and lo and behold, we share a hotel room. They boned again. Story 19. Not me, but my cousin, who has a bit of a drinking problem, was staying at our grandparents' house for a local festival. She proceeds to get hammered drunk and walks home. Walks in the door, goes to the bathroom, and gets naked and crawls into bed. The problem is that it wasn't in the room she was sleeping in. It was in my grandparents' room, so crawled in next to my grandfather naked. Story 20. I was back in town to see my family, and I met up with my dad and stepmom. They were out drinking with some of our closest family friends. Well, after about an hour or so, they're getting pretty drunk and rowdy. I noticed the woman, including my stepmom, start getting real flirtatious with each other. Mind you, there are 5 couples, including my parents, at this gathering. I watch it continue, and I have to admit I'm a little uncomfortable seeing all these people I grew up around being overly flirtatious in public and in general. After a while, I finally said, "What the heck is going on here?" to my parents. My stepmom started laughing and replied drunkenly with, "To be honest, you're the only one in this room I haven't banged." Needless to say, I left quickly after that. Sounds like the parents might have been swingers. I've seen people get railed pretty hard for that sort of thing on Reddit before, if it was known they had children. So I'd advise this OP to be grateful. If that lifestyle was going on under their roof, at least they didn't find out about it until after they'd already grown up and moved out of the house. It could definitely have been much, much worse. Story 21. Thought it would be a good idea to make breakfast for my dad and stepmom. Cooked it all, got it ready, and brought the plates in, and thought bringing it in unannounced would be a wonderful surprise. I was not greeted by smiles. Instead, I was presented with an image that is forever burnt into my mind. My dad under the covers, obviously plugging away with my stepmom's head hanging off the side of the bed, with her eyes closed and showing me her O-face. I retreated quickly, but my brain went, well, better put that in permanent storage and make it one of the clearest memories possible. Don't worry, you won't be forgetting any details at all. Story 22. Not my story, a friend of mine from high school. His whole family went to Colombia for Christmas vacation, and he fell in love with a girl out there. They went out on a few dates and kissed and stuff, but they didn't go any further yet. Then one night they were having a party at his family's house. Everyone was partying outside, so the two of them, 17 years old and a bad combo of drunk and horny, snuck back into the house to do it for the first time. They start going at it, then the whole family basically walks in on them, laughed their butts off, and walked right back out. After being long distance all throughout college, they got married a few years ago and just had their first kid last year. Story 23. My husband and I had to move in with his parents for about 3 months when we were having financial issues. As I have the very last bag in my hand, ready to move out to our new home, I set the bag on the living room floor and went to the bathroom. When I came out, something was going off in the bag. I said, it's probably our son's Thomas the Tank toy. My mother-in-law dives right in and pulls out my vibrator and holds it up for like 30 seconds, like she's the Statue of Liberty holding up her freaking torch. My father-in-law and brother-in-law were also right there in the room. Needless to say, they still bring it up, and Thomas the Train is now code for vibrator in that family. This is funny, but the part that really gets me is the last bit. I'm just wondering how often the subject of vibrators comes up in family conversation that they could even have a code for it in the first place. And if the son actually does have a Thomas the Tank Engine toy, that must make things super confusing whenever the toy or the show comes up. That poor kid must wonder why all the adults in his life are constantly laughing and looking at his mother every time he tries to talk about his favorite show. To be real though, Mr. Conductor would be a fantastic name for a vibrator, or a male escort. In fact, if I ever take up exotic dancing, that's almost certainly the stage costume I'm going with. Story 24. My uncle's new wife was meeting the family for the first time, and after a glass of wine, she asks if she can be herself. Everyone said yes. Then she asked my then 71-year-old grandpa if he sits at home watching Korn and jacking off all day. Edit. This was our first time having her at a family function. We had met her in passing at their wedding. I know, it's weird. So no one really knew anything about her. We found out sometime later she had started a brawl at her own wedding after we had departed, and my family is no longer welcome at American Legion. Story 25. My uncle is a pimp in Gambia. He's originally from England. My cousin once went to stay with him. Towards the end of his first night there, he was told he had a present waiting for him in bed. Goes upstairs to find a young lady completely naked laying across the bed. Not sure how long she'd been waiting. Story 26. Shared a kiss with my cousin. She kissed me and it held for 1 to 2 seconds because both of us were drunk and I didn't want to be rough to just shove her away. Let's just say she had a crazy patch in her life. Story 27. Found a picture of my dad wearing lingerie. Not in a I enjoy wearing it at home by myself kind of way, but in a I was forced to by my mates while messing around kind of way. Hilarious, with a hint of mental scarring, because ew. It's possible that his friends made him do it, and that he didn't want to, but as food for thought, I'd just like to point out the fact that he chose to keep the picture, so at the very least, he doesn't seem to actively hate the memory. Besides, if his friends could convince him to wear lingerie, who knows what else they convinced him to do. Generally speaking, you probably don't want to know too much about what your parents have done when they were drinking. Story 28. My auntie rang my best friend, who was mowing her lawns during that time, and asked him to sleep with her. He declined. It's good because, even though I don't see her often, she usually slips me $50. I figure it's her way of saying, shut the F up. Story 29. When I was really young, I was playing PlayStation in my brother's room. He has this giant poster of some blonde model, half naked. Paused the game for a quick 5-minute wank. I finished up and just looked towards his bedroom door. My mom literally just walked away as I looked up. Never got mentioned ever. Story 30. Had my girlfriend over. We did the nasty. I threw the used condom into the trash. Took her home, then came home to my mom and sister laughing their butts off. Turns out our dog ran up to my room, grabbed it out of the trash, and was playing with it while I was gone, and they found it. Edit. Apparently this is common. Story 31. There was a time when my family lived in a tiny apartment. We had one bedroom with a double-decker bed. My parents slept on the bottom bunk, and my older sister and I slept at the top. Well, one night I wake up to the bed shaking, and peeking below, I realized my parents were going at it. I was like maybe 8 or 9, so I wasn't really grossed out, but just really confused. My sister slept through the entire thing, or so I've always thought. I'm not saying these parents should have to live in celibacy just because their apartment is small, but there has to be a way to get one off without your young daughter sleeping just a few feet above you. This is just a matter of basic physics. Obviously, if you get busy on the bottom bunk, it's going to shake the top bunk. I'd be inclined to assume that at least one of the kids is going to wake up. I'm actually pretty impressed that the older sister managed not to. Story 32. My mom chased my teenage brothers around the house, inside and out, with a dill pickle dough once. I had the chance to ask my brother about it later. He was ticked off about it at the time, but I was like 6, and my mom was laughing so much, so I thought everyone was having a good time. Looking back at it, I can see why he was ticked off. Mom's dill pickle dough. Ew. And why she thought it was so funny. Good memories. Story 33. My mom came home one day to a giant pair of boobs flapping up and down on the computer screen with the volume on high. Coincidentally, my brother was the only one home that day. Story 34. My uncle cheated on my aunt with her brother's wife for a while about 17 or 18 years ago. Nobody outside of those 4 people knows except me and my eldest cousin, because my aunt got drunk at one family reunion and told us. Everyone thinks the 2 families just hate each other for some petty reason. What makes it worse is my aunt has a child who's turning 18, who looks nothing like his dad, but strikingly similar to my other uncle. Yet nobody has ever mentioned anything, and we have never brought it up. Too long didn't read, my cousin might be my cousin. It's kind of impressive that both couples stayed together. I know that some spouses will do their best to forgive and move on, but I really wouldn't have assumed that both couples managed to do it. You'd think at least one of them would have wound up breaking up, and if there are suspicions about the kid's actual father, I'd expect that to make it even more likely. I know that some, especially conservative people, believe that divorce is wrong, but I would assume there are exceptions that make it okay. This really feels like one of them. Story 35. I was caught mid-wank by my sister's then-boyfriend, who was living with us at the time. I covered things up quick enough, which was a good thing, as I was wanking to a mag I found under his bed. Story 36. My grandma told my whole family at dinner that she had done it on the beach once. When asked when, she replied, when I was 76. Story 37. I shouted out loud that my dad's wiener was huge, at an Olive Garden when I was 4. Dad dong syndrome had me pretty good. Here's the thing, I actually don't want to hear the story of this OP seeing their dad's wiener, but now I feel like I have to. At the very least, I need to know why this was coming up at Olive Garden. Was it a random outburst? Had it come up naturally in conversation somehow? Or was this OP actually at Olive Garden when they saw it? Because that's a story that pretty much demands to be told. I know I won't get satisfaction on this, but I'm ever so grateful that Olive Garden is going to be living rent-free in my head for the rest of the day. A part of me is craving their breadsticks now. Yet, a part of me is just wondering how the breadsticks compare to OP's dad. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.